Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm your host, Brian Keane, three-time best-selling author, online fitness coach, and nutritionist here to help you normally by deconstructing expert guests on all things health, fitness, and mindset. But today's podcast is a solo, unedited recap of the recent Hyrox event in Dublin. This is, and I got my ticket on the bandwagon for the thing that is taking, I won't say fitness by storm, but is definitely the in thing at the minute, the fad of fitness, but in a very fun way, in a good way. Similar to CrossFit about a decade ago, this is the current thing that is and has most people's attention when it comes to fitness, and that is the Hyrox competitions. So I wanted to jump into one. I signed up the day the tickets came out for Dublin, which was in the summer at some point, and said I would jump in, see how it went, see if it was fun, and if it was something that I wanted to do more of, which I'll talk about as we go through this episode, I would do a proper training specific plan for it. But as a lot of you know who are listeners to this podcast, Kilimanjaro, which I summited with a group of my followers about 2 weeks ago, was the primary focus for the last few months. And a little bit of a cheat inside look into how I train. That Hyrox style training is actually how I do most of my training generally, where I'll do kilometer runs with circuits in between, normally body part splits. So at the minute, it's push-pull legs, but a kilometer run in between exercises. So something like a dumbbell fly, kilometer run. I do the 20 reps or 50 reps if it's high volume. Bench press, I might do 8, 10 reps or 5 reps on a heavy set, then a kilometer run. And I'll keep the system of Hyrox in my workouts, and it's been what I've been doing for the past several months. CrossFit has elements of this too. Back in 2012, I was doing a lot of CrossFit when I lived in London, and the workouts like Murph, and I think it was the Lumberjack 20 ones with like mile runs or 400-meter runs in between circuits is actually one of my favorite ways to train and one of my favorite ways to work out when I'm not training for a marathon or an ultra or anything that's long zone to steady state. So I probably went into this in decent shape and decent nick, even though I didn't specifically train for it. So what I will talk about in today's podcast is the layout, the Dublin event, how it ran, some of the training that I did first, which I'll expand on now, and the approach. So what went well, what mistakes I would avoid, and the plan to do another Hyrox, because this is something that I will definitely do more of, but I'll get through that all through this episode. So if you are interested either in learning about Hyrox, or you have competed in it and you want to improve your time, or it's on your to-do list for 2025 or beyond, then hopefully you'll get a lot from today's podcast. So as I mentioned, I jumped on the bandwagon when the tickets for Dublin came out, and part of the reason for this was I wasn't 100% sure if Hyrox was something I was going to enjoy. It's very similar to my normal training program, and I can be, which sounds very funny for those of you who listen to this podcast and any of the other podcasts, the online business podcast, or follow my social, I can be a little bit lazy when it comes to traveling to things that aren't necessarily excessively long. And my rule of thumb historically has always been that I don't travel to a race that's going to take me less than 90 minutes. So I will travel for a marathon, I'll travel for an ultra, I'll travel for something that's multi-day, but I tend to not go outside of, the west of Ireland for something that's going to take me less than 90 minutes. But Hyrox was popping up on my Instagram feed. A lot of people I know have done it, and it's kind of in my wheelhouse for how I like to train. So I said, I'll sign up, I'll see how I find it, and we'll basically see how it goes. So I rocked up to Dublin in the RDS. On Friday, I was in the open division, the men's open division, starting at 11 o'clock. And I didn't know an awful lot about Hyrox going in. So I knew there was sled pulls, I knew there was a ski erg, I knew there was a rower. I didn't know there was burpee broad jumps. I signed up on the day that it came out and had a look at the circuits and was like, yeah, that's perfect, that's cool. And then I checked it again the morning of the race, and there was burpee broad jumps, there was farmer carries, and there was sandbag lunges, which is, again, there's 3 exercises that I didn't even check beforehand, but they're in my routine. I'd regularly have different variations of lunges. I'd have different variations of burpees or burpee broad jumps or broad jumps with box jumps factored into my routine. So again, none of those were going to be an issue. And farmer's carry, again, built like a short little hobbit, 5'8", 85 kilos. Farmer's carries aren't a difficult movement for me. And so going into it, I said I'd go up, see how I found it. And what I didn't know, which was going to sound like such an idiotic thing to say, was when I Googled and searched Hyrox, I assumed it was a kilometer run with a circuit, then a kilometer run, then a circuit, then a kilometer run, then a circuit, which is how I train normally. But when I got up there, the layout in Dublin, and this might be different for other Hyrox events, I'm not sure, but it wasn't a kilometer run. It was based on laps. So it was, I think, 3 laps to start, then it was 2.5 laps, then it was 3 laps. So there was different laps each time depending on the station you came out of. So I was very confused when I started the run because I have a relatively decent 1 kilometer time. I would normally kind of hold a 4:30 pace or even a 4 minute pace for a kilometer if I'm going quite quickly. And I had to slow down several times because I kept getting lost. I didn't know, was I supposed to be in a station? Was I supposed to do another lap? And as you'll see with my time, I did the whole thing in an hour 20, but I got penalized, I think it was 12 minutes in the end because of all the times I went wrong. So how it worked is you do a run to start, which was 3 laps. Then you did your first station, which was your sled push, if I'm not mistaken. No, it was a ski erg for 1,000 meters. And then you do a 2.5 laps, and then you go to your second station, which was your sled push, and so on and so forth. I assumed, and this is just me being a focus group of one, I don't recommend anybody approach it this way, was I just rocked up on the day assuming that it was going to be, either 2 laps or 3 laps, and it'd be easy to kind of manage. I didn't think you'd have to logistically figure it out in your head what you were doing. What I didn't know in the Dublin event in particular, and this seems to be split for anyone I was chatting to online, about 50% of people saw this and half didn't, is there was a screen that actually told you what you were doing on each lap. So you'd run around, it would say keep running, or it would say station 1 or station 2, station 3. I was 6 stations in before I even spotted the screen, so I didn't realize there was actually something there that would tell you. So this is me getting lost. Like, I get lost from my bedroom to my kitchen. My logistical navigational skills are absolutely shocking. For those of you who've listened to the podcast on the Arctic or Marathon des Sables, like, if I didn't have Simon with me, I would be still in the Sahara or still in the Arctic because I'd just be going around in circles because my navigational skills are absolutely shocking. But when I landed up at the event, I went in, did a walk around the RDS, and instantly thought, okay, this is actually going to be pretty confusing, but I didn't think too much else of it. I said I'd figure it out on the race. I did my normal registration. I went in, had a look around, and then actually went back to the car and worked for an hour before it was time to warm up. So in Dublin, and I'm sure all the Hyroxes are the same, they've got like a warm-up area, which is actually a really good setup with the treadmills, there's rowers, there's bikes, there's weights, so you can actually do a proper warm-up. So at about 10:30, I started to warm up normal, rower, bike, a little bit of jogging, then stretching and dynamic stretching, just loosening out my glutes, loosening out my hamstrings, the usual stuff I would do before a longer race. And 11 a.m. came. They give you this timer that shows that your wave is coming up, and basically the race starts. As I was running around the first one, I realized that it wasn't going to be very straightforward, and it wasn't going to be just 2 laps or 3 laps because the stations were darted all over the place. And I was in a Facebook group, in one of the community Hyrox Facebook groups, and I saw people complaining about the layout beforehand. Now, I didn't understand what they meant by the layout being all over the place. Now, the layout was totally fine. I think if you had a map and you knew what was going on and you knew that there was a screen there, and if there had been an email beforehand, I didn't get any email beforehand to say about my start times or the layout or anything like that, it probably would have been fine. And when I started to run around and do the first couple of laps, I definitely know where I got 6 minutes of my penalty because I missed 1 lap on the second go. So instead of doing 3 laps, I ended up doing 2. And then when I realized I had gone wrong because the group I'd started with were behind me, I did an extra lap the next time to try and make up the distance because I was tracking it on my watch, and I got penalized again then for that. So I had several penalizations. I don't even know if that's a word, but that is something that happens with Hyrox because they're quite strict with the times, and rightly so. Like, if you've got people aiming to PB or aiming to go to the Europeans or the World Championships, you have to be quite strict on this. But again, I took it kind of leisurely. I didn't mind about the penalizations. I ended up getting a 1 hour 20 time, and that was including getting lost and going to the wrong station several times, which we'll get onto. So it was a lap, and let's just say it was the kilometer. It was split up into different distances, but you had the ski out first, you had the sled push second, which was quite difficult on the legs. It was about, I think it's 150 kilos on the sled, and that's no joke when you try and run after that, but it's only like 4 lengths. So you go up, down, and then it's fine. You do your kilometer, then you come back and it's sled pulls, which I quite liked, where you're pulling a heavy sled towards you. Again, up, down, 4 rounds. Then you go back out for what would be equivalent of a kilometer run, just for easiness sake, for anyone that's unfamiliar with the layout. And then you come back into your next station, which I think is burpee broad jumps. which I loved. There's a technique. You have to have your hands above your feet at all times. But again, I'm built like a little hobbit. I have tiny little legs. I can burpee broad jump until the cows come home. So that was fine for me. Back out for a kilometer run, then back in for sandbag lunges, which were again fine, 20 kilo sandbag lunges, nothing too heavy, nothing too difficult. If you're have a good base in strength training, it's going to be fine. Then you come back out, you've got your rower, which is 1,000 meters. You go back out, you've got your farmers carries, and you go back out and you do your wall balls, which finish at 100 wall balls on a 6 kilo wall ball, and then a kilometer run in between. When I look back on the event, it is something that I would 100% do again. I really enjoyed it. I think for anyone looking to build up a good fitness base across the board, Hyrox is a really good way of doing that, because you're getting your 8 kilometer run, which isn't a short distance, but it's not also very long. If you think a ultra marathon, or a half marathon is 21 kilometers, you're well under that bracket. So you're able to go relatively quickly on those, what would be equivalent to a 1 kilometer run, to keep the logistics in your head easier to see. But you also have your strength work there, like your sled pulls, your sled pushes, your farmers carries, your sandbag lunges, your wall balls. You're working most of your body parts and most of your major muscle groups, with maybe the exception of chest. You're getting that a little bit in your burpee broad jumps. So it's a really good training program for anyone, and you can do this at any speed. So you'll have your elites who are doing this, in the people who win will do it in less than an hour, 59 minutes or so, I think was the winner, all the way up to an hour 15, an hour 30 is the average. And you'll have people doing 2-3 hours. There was one guy there doing I think it's called the adaptive race. He was blind, and he had his guide doing it with him, which is incredible. That was one of the most inspiring things I saw, and was worth the price of the ticket just to see somebody doing that. And I'm so glad that's starting to go viral on social media, because it shows that fitness can be so inclusive, and something like that can give a lot of people permission to work through what might be holding them back, whether it's something mental, something physical, and see, okay, well, if he's able to do that, he's blind, he actually can't see, he needed a guide. That can be a really inspiring thing. So for me, that was worth the price of the admission alone to see that. And I would recommend, I do think this is a good approach. It is very faddy at the minute, and is something that is very popular in terms of the approach people are taking to their training. You'll see a lot of Hyrox affiliated gyms popping up all over the place, particularly in CrossFit boxes, but for good reason. It's accessible for most. It's 8 movements you need to get decent at, and then your kilometer run, which is if you're training for any sort of either speed program where you're doing 200 meters, 400 meter repeats, or you're doing more distance, you're actually running the kilometers in your session, you're going to build up a very, very good base of fitness across the board, and have that general fitness, general strength, general endurance. It's a little bit of, the joke I mentioned on Instagram, you're a hybrid athlete, where you're an average lifter, shit runner, which is very true. With Hyrox, you end up getting kind of jack of all trades. You're not amazing at anything, but you're pretty good at everything. And I think Hyrox encapsulates that quite well. So this is something I would do again. I think for those who are considering it, I would sign up to a race and see how you find it. I got a couple of DMs. I put up a question box on Instagram asking about the importance and the layout in terms of how to pace and how to set up your training program, and how important the runs are. In terms of Hyrox, the runs are the most important thing. There's no shadow of a doubt. The circuits actually take not that much time, with the exception of, I think, the wall balls. For me, I found the wall balls a little bit tricky. I don't know if anyone else is like me. We are kind of an excessive sweater. If you've ran AK, I think it's because of my weight, and I have a natural propensity to sweat. So by the time I got to the wall balls, I got smashed in the face a couple of times, because you're doing 100 reps with a 6 kilo wall ball. And with 6 kilos, this is going to sound a little bit counterintuitive, but if you're a little bit stronger, sometimes you're actually better to have a heavier wall ball, because it'll drop you into a squat and you can build up a better momentum. 6 kilos isn't heavy enough to drop you into a squat if you've got quite strong legs. Whereas if you've got, say, 9 kilos or 10 kilos, it's heavy enough that it'll automatically drop you into a squat. So you're able to build up a routine and a momentum with this. I learned this from CrossFit as well. So that is probably the most difficult. And then the sled pushes are no joke. Like 150 kilos will tax your legs regardless of how fit you are. The only upside is that it comes early in the race, so you're relatively fresh at that point anyways. So it's perfectly fine. I would say, in terms of once I got my bearings, I really enjoyed it. Now, I was about halfway through. I was actually on station 6 when I realized there was a screen that told me what I should be doing, because I stopped 5 or 6 times to ask people that were working there, which I now realized were just volunteers. Like, where do I go? I was like, what lap am I on? But I had no way of knowing that because I didn't know before the race you had to track it. I met one really smart guy at the end, at the finish line, who had written down all the laps on his hand. So he had like 3 laps, 2.5 laps, 3 laps, or whatever it was for each round. So he was making reference to it as he went around, and I was thinking that was clever, that was smart, I should have done that. So I've signed up for another one. I've signed up for the Hyrox in Turin on February 2nd, and I'm going to be doing a proper training split for this one, because now once you've done it, sometimes there is an element of just course correct and sign up for a race, get your baseline on one, if you enjoy it and want to actually train properly for it, and two, having done the race is better than reading about 50 or 100 people who have done the race, because you can use your experience as a reference point. And I've gone through my whole fitness career, from ultra marathons to adventure races, off this principle. Just do it once, see if you enjoy it, then sign up a second time and have a structured training program. So something I'll be doing over December and January for myself, and I can document this on social, let me know if it's something you want to see, is I'm going to be doing a lot more Hyrox specific movements. So those kilometer runs will have the sled push sessions in between. And what I plan to do is make my workouts, I'm going to keep my normal push pull leg split, because it's the way I like to train, and then add in Hyrox specific finishes. So it might be 5 kilometer runs broken up into 5 rounds with a sled push in between. So what I'll do is I'll do 4 rounds of a sled, kilometer run, 4 rounds of a sled, kilometer run, 4 rounds of a sled, kilometer run, for 5 kilometers total. And I will keep some form of structure to that training program so that I can work for a faster time on the runs, but also condition my body to do the movements that are specific to Hyrox. And that is how I plan to approach Turin. I do plan to do a decent time. I've actually signed up for the pro in Turin, which is just heavier weights. So the weights jump, I think it's 150 kilos on the sled, jumps to 200 kilos. The lunges go from 20 kilos to 30. The wall balls go from 6 kilos to 9 kilos, and the fireman's carry go from 24 kilos to 32 kilos, I think. So I'm going to be training with those weights, those heavier weights, again, just because it suits me. Like you might be different. If you're a stronger runner, you're going to be better with the open and then working for your speed and your time. But if you come from a bodybuilding background or a power background or a CrossFit background, you're probably going to be quite strong. So the pro is open to anybody. It's basically just the open with increased weight. So you can sign up to the pro and you can sign up to the open. It's just very much personal preference. So yeah, really enjoyed it. As I said, it took me a while to get my bearings. I think if I was to do it again, now I was fine at the finish line. I was fine the next day, 2 days later. It's not that much more difficult to how I would normally train in my sessions. So my body was fine after. I didn't have any issues with it. I tend to find long distance stuff hits me a lot harder when I do a marathon or an ultra marathon. I normally have to do like a bit of a week of a deload off the back end just to let my body repair. But something like this, I was fine. I trained again. That was Friday morning. I took a rest day Saturday. I trained Sunday morning. I trained again this morning, which is Monday morning when I'm recording this podcast, and back to normal. So my body bounced back quite quickly. Again, individual mileage may vary depending on how you train and what you do. But for me, I was fine. A little bit of tightness in the glutes and the hamstrings, probably from the sled pushes and the lunges. But again, nothing too extreme. So yeah, a little bit of a recap. Decent event. A bit confusing in terms of how it was laid out. But I'm sure had I searched it and researched it more on the front end, that wouldn't have been a problem. I would have liked a couple more emails just to tell me my start time. By pure luck, I had Declan, who did the Hyrox on Friday as well in a later wave, who was on my 12-week business coaching, was doing it as well. And we met on the Thursday, and he searched my wave because I thought I was running at 10 to 10. He's like, I don't think you're running until 11. So I would have liked a little bit more upfront communication, just an email, maybe to say what time you were on, or the layout would have been nice. But again, you probably search all that online. I'm sure it was on the website. I'm sure it was on different channels. Just I didn't get it specifically. That would have been a little bit nice on the front end. If I'd known there was a screen to track your time, that would have made a massive difference, because I was literally like a deer in the headlights for the first 3 rounds because I had no idea what the stations were and how many laps I was supposed to do. And in the end, there's a picture, actually I might post this on social, where I'm on the rower and there was a guy in a GA jersey with one of the Movember Tashes who started the same wave as me. And I literally just held off on the rower until he was ready because he was in my wave. So I knew how many laps he was doing and then I just copied him. So that was, again, my approach. Don't recommend it. Made way more mistakes than I did success stuff on this. But again, was grand. An hour 20. I reckon I can comfortably knock off 10, maybe 20 minutes off that if I can get a proper training split going for it. Maybe not with the pro because the weights will be higher, but an enjoyable event all the same. If it's something you want to do, I recommend signing up. There's a long waiting list for these Hyrox events, but it's a good excuse to travel. It's a good excuse to go to different countries, similar to marathons, where you might want to see Turin, or you might want to go to Vienna, or you might want to go to Valencia, or go to Chicago, or go to LA. There's Hyrox events all over the place. So again, not an endorsement. I'm not sponsored by Hyrox. I have no affiliation with Hyrox at all, but I do like things that get people moving. I like when fitness trends have an accessible element to them, and I think this is very accessible. You might do it in an hour. It might take you 3 hours, but you'll complete it all the same. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed it. As I said, nothing else really changed outside of it. That's the layout. It's how I approached it, some of the mistakes I made, and the next training block I will do something a bit more specific to Hyrox for it, and try and get that time down, just again to have a bit of focus and something to train for. I've been vocal on this podcast in the past that with running in particular, if I'm not signed up for a race, I will not run. I just don't enjoy it. It's the hardest of all the cardiovascular activities for me. I prefer to bike, I prefer to swim, I love weight training, but running I just find monotonous and boring. So once I have a race to sign up for, it kind of forces me in my training to do it. So this is an alternative to, ultras, half marathons, full marathons, that is a little bit more accessible in terms of the distance for people. So I like anything that does that, that spreads and gets people out there moving more. And again, don't be afraid. Get a coach if you need a coach, get a trainer, sign up to a Hyrox affiliated CrossFit box that do weekly classes and get your base up that way. Outside of that, look for a board that tells you what laps you're on. Maybe check out the layout of the venue before you go, and then it's just a case of training as normal for a program like you'd approach any race. So a lot of stuff here that I wouldn't do what I did. Always remember your reference point for fitness is going to be different. Kilimanjaro was my priority, and training for that, bringing a group up there, making sure I stayed healthy and well for that, and then a little bit of Hyrox workouts in between, because that's how I've been training for probably about 12 months. When I'm not training for an ultra, I like shorter distance circuits added in between my normal hypertrophy workouts or strength-based workouts. So that's how I approach it. And again, nothing else changed. Normal stretching, taking a pre-workout beforehand that I always use. I posted a video on YouTube last week on if I wanted my dream body in 2024, 2025, this is what I do. And I posted my pre-workout and I pinned it to the comment. So I make my own pre-workout, combination of creatine, caffeine, L-carnitine, etc. It's in there pinned on that first YouTube comment if you want to check it out. If you're similar to me with a sensitive stomach that you can't handle pre-workouts, or you just want to add your own individual dosages depending on your weight. So for example, I'm 85 kilos, so I adjust my creatine intake or my citrulline malate intake depending on my weight. And then if my weight drops, I scale it down. If my weight goes up, I scale it up slightly, and you end up saving a small fortune. I just buy them from My Protein or bulk powders or wherever they're on offer, and then I just put them together myself, and they tend to last 6 months when you're making it yourself. And again, caffeine tablets, you get them anywhere, 200 mcgs for me before training. I use the exact same as I would before a gym session. So this effectively for me was my gym session for Friday. Took an hour 20. Most of my workouts will be about an hour max, maybe an hour 20 if I'm doing something longer. So again, nothing too stressful on the body from my side, but you might be different. So you might need a complete deload on the front end training for Hyrox, and then a bit of a taper on the back end so that you're not going back into heavy training straight away where your risk of injury goes up. Or you might need to take a couple of weeks where you're just letting your body become acclimatized to the deload and the taper down and the workout intensity, so that you don't get run down, you don't get sick, you don't get any of the negative effects. I didn't have to do that, and probably anyone else that's on that upper echelon of training, this will effectively be another workout day for you, as opposed to something that you structure your entire month around. So again, depending on if you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced, you might want to adjust your training around that. Same with your nutrition. The race was short, so there was no nutrition to worry about. When you do ultra marathons or even marathons, you have to look at your race day nutrition, or even adventure races. I did the Gale Force in 2022, and that was about 4 hours with a lot of runs, a lot of cycles, and then a kayak mixed in with the climbing Cropatrick and running back down Cropatrick. So when the race becomes longer, you need to look at that nutrition. Otherwise, you're just going to approach it the same way as you would normally do. How would you eat before training normally? How would you load the day before a leg session, for example? And you just keep your nutrition the same. So for me, nothing changed. Kept the same food, same supplement regimen, same training off the back end. So that was me. That's my recap on Dublin. Again, let me know how you found it. Hit me up on Instagram. comment below this real post on social if it helps, and let me know how you found the event, if you were at it, or if Hyrox is on your list. And yeah, hopefully this recap of my experience helps. Again, probably a little bit of a different recap to any other podcast you listen because of the way that I went into it, but I will do another one off the back of Turin, and I'll talk about the 8-week prep in terms of the training, the nutrition, how the race went, and then what I'm doing on the back end, because I plan to push that one quite hard in in February 2nd in 2025. So yeah, that's everything from me from today's bonus podcast, unedited, raw, going up as it is. Hope you enjoyed. Catch you all soon.